My sister snatched a sterling silver cake knife at her own baby shower, drove the tip against my pregnant belly, and screamed that I stole her life and her baby's. I just stared at her, terrified but refusing to blink. That was 9 months ago. Last week, the police uncovered a fully furnished nursery hidden inside a climate-controlled storage unit with my twins' names painted on the walls. If you have ever had to protect your peace and your family from toxic blood ties, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe to hear exactly how this nightmare unraveled. The Crystal Pines Country Club was supposed to be the perfect picturesque backdrop for Jada to show off her seemingly flawless life. My mother Brenda had spent 3 grueling months curating the guest list, ensuring every prominent member of our church and local social circle was there to witness her golden child celebrate her 5-month pregnancy. I was 6 months pregnant with twins myself, but in my family I was just supposed to blend into the background and applaud my sister. I wore a simple navy wrap dress, sitting quietly at a corner table next to my husband Jamal, an architect whose calm presence usually grounded me against my family's relentless drama. We had finally reached the gift-opening portion of the afternoon. Jada sat on a massive wicker peacock chair draped in imported floral garlands, looking like a queen holding court. Her husband Connor lounged casually against a nearby marble pillar. He was a white man born into old money that everyone in our circle whispered was rapidly drying up, though he still carried himself with the unchecked arrogance of a billionaire. He swirled a glass of scotch, completely checked out of the event, smirking occasionally at the extravagant display of gifts. Aunt Denise, my father's older sister, walked up to the towering gift table. Aunt Denise has always been a little absent-minded, and as she reached for a beautiful gift bag with a custom boutique logo on it, she completely missed the tag that clearly had my name written across the front. She carried it over and handed it to Jada with a warm, beaming smile. Jada tore into the expensive tissue paper, with that performative enthusiasm she used whenever cameras or judging eyes were pointing at her. She reached inside, pulled out the contents, and held them high for the room to see. The entire country club ballroom fell dead silent. Dangling from Jada's perfectly manicured fingers was a set of matching newborn onesies. One said double, the other said trouble. Jada's radiant smile vanished instantly. Her hands started to shake, the soft cotton fabric trembling in her grip. She stared at the onesies, then her eyes darted wildly across the room, bypassing the confused guests, until they locked dead onto me. I did not buy that gift. Aunt Denise had brought it for me to celebrate my twins, and just handed it to the wrong pregnant woman in a moment of confusion. But Jada did not care about logic. To her, everything in the universe was an intentional, calculated attack on her spotlight. She dropped the onesies onto the polished hardwood floor like they were on fire. Before anyone could even process what was happening, Jada spun around to the elaborate dessert table situated right behind her peacock chair. Her hand closed aggressively around the handle of a heavy sterling silver cake knife. It happened so incredibly fast. She lunged across the open space between us, knocking over a stack of carefully wrapped boxes in her blind rage. Guests gasped and scrambled backward, chairs scraping loudly against the floor. Jamal started to spring to his feet, but Jada was already standing directly over me, her breathing ragged and heavy. She pressed the sharp tip of the cake knife right against the center of my pregnant belly. The metal felt ice cold even through the thick fabric of my wrap dress. "This is my day," she screamed, her voice cracking in a hysterical pitch that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. "You stole my life and my baby's." I sat perfectly still, my hands instinctively gripping the armrests of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Jada," I said, fighting to keep my voice as steady and low as possible despite the panic surging through my veins. "Put the knife down. You are making a scene." "A scene," she shrieked, pressing the blade just a fraction harder against me. I felt Jamal freeze beside me, his muscles coiled tight as he calculated his angle to intervene without getting me stabbed. "You just had to get knocked up with twins to upstage me, didn't you? You couldn't just let me have one single milestone. Just like you stole the spotlight when you bought that 5-bedroom house in Oak Ridge that I wanted. You hoard your wealth from your consulting firm while I have to beg for scraps to afford a basic designer stroller." I stared at her, genuinely horrified by the sheer depth of her delusion. She had outbid herself on that house, and her husband Connor was the one mismanaging their finances into the ground. But in Jada's mind and in our mother's mind, I was always the villain. I was the ungrateful scapegoat who refused to write blank checks for Jada's extravagant lifestyle. Connor let out a loud, echoing laugh from his spot by the pillar. "Oh, relax, Kendra," he called out, taking another long sip of his scotch. "She is just hormonal. It is a joke. Can't you take a joke?" There was absolutely nothing funny about the crazed, dead-eyed look staring back at me from my sister's face. Jamal moved with terrifying speed. He did not hesitate or negotiate. He lunged forward, grabbing Jada's wrist with one massive hand and twisting it sharply downward, while using his other arm to forcefully shove her shoulder back. The heavy silver cake knife clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor, sliding away under a table. Connor suddenly stopped laughing. His smug demeanor evaporated as he pushed off the pillar, his face turning bright red with indignation. "Hey, keep your hands off my wife," he yelled, taking an aggressive step toward Jamal. Jamal stepped right into Connor's space, standing a full 4 inches taller and radiating a quiet, lethal energy. "Try me," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone that commanded the room. "I dare you." Connor stopped dead in his tracks. His old money arrogance was completely useless against the absolute reality of Jamal's fury. He backed down, muttering something incoherent under his breath and nervously adjusting his expensive suit jacket to save face. I pulled my phone from my purse, my fingers trembling so violently I could barely swipe to unlock the screen. I dialed 911 and pressed the phone tightly to my ear, listening to the first ring. "What are you doing?" a frantic voice hissed beside me. "My mother." Brenda rushed over, her face twisted in absolute panic. Not because her eldest daughter had just threatened her unborn grandchildren with a deadly weapon, but because the wealthy women from her church committee were standing just feet away, witnessing the unraveling of her perfect family facade. "I am calling the police," I said, taking a deliberate step back from her grasping hands. "Jada just threatened my life and my children with a knife." Brenda lunged forward and slapped the phone right out of my hand with vicious force. The device hit the floor and skidded away into the crowd. "Don't you dare ruin your sister's registry over a simple hormone spike," Brenda snarled, pointing a perfectly manicured shaking finger directly in my face. "You have been jealous of Jada since she made the debutante cotillion, and you didn't. You always try to ruin her moments. You are going to go sit in your car right now and stop making a spectacle of this family." I looked at my mother, a woman who had spent 32 years aggressively gaslighting me to protect her golden child from any semblance of accountability. I looked past her to my father Terrence, who was sitting at a table in the far corner, staring intently at his plate of food, completely refusing to intervene because maintaining his own peaceful retirement was vastly more important than my safety. I slowly bent down, retrieved my phone from the floor, and looked Brenda dead in the eye. "I am filing a police report," I said clearly, my voice carrying over the murmurs of the shocked guests. Brenda crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with a cold, familiar hatred. "If you call those cops and try to put your pregnant sister in jail, you are dead to me, Kendra. Do you hear me? Dead to me." I turned to Jamal, taking his strong hand in mine. "Let's go." We walked out of the country club, leaving the shattered remains of the baby shower behind us. I thought the worst was over. I truly thought that distancing myself from their profound toxicity would be enough to keep my twins safe. I had no idea that Jada's psychotic break with a cake knife was merely the opening move in a highly coordinated, terrifying campaign to steal absolutely everything I had built. The heavy oak doors of the Crystal Pines Country Club had barely swung shut behind us when the piercing wail of police sirens shattered the manicured silence of the golf course. Jamal had dialed 911 the exact second the silver cake knife hit the hardwood floor inside the ballroom. 2 patrol cars swerved aggressively into the circular driveway, their red and blue lights flashing violently against the pristine white columns of the clubhouse entrance. 4 officers stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts as they scanned the area. Before Jamal or I could even brief them on the assault, Connor slid through the country club doors like a greased politician. He adjusted his tailored blazer, flashed a disarming, highly practiced smile, and stepped directly between my husband and the police. "Officers, false alarm," Connor announced, his tone dripping with that effortless, unearned authority he always wielded. He spoke to them with the casual ease of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. Just a minor family misunderstanding inside. My sister-in-law here is carrying twins, and you know how these high-risk pregnancies get. She is having a bit of an overly emotional hysterical episode, hormones and all that. Absolutely no need for the badges today, gentlemen. I felt Jamal go completely rigid beside me. As a black man standing in front of 4 police officers, Jamal knew exactly how carefully he had to move. But as my husband, he refused to let this arrogant man rewrite reality. Jamal stepped forward, his voice a low, undeniable rumble of absolute authority. My wife is not hysterical. Her sister just pressed a silver blade into her stomach and threatened to kill our unborn children. I want her arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon right now. Connor immediately pivoted, his blue eyes narrowing maliciously as he pointed an accusing finger straight at Jamal. He knew exactly what he was doing, weaponizing his privilege in a split second. The only assault here happened when this guy shoved me out of the way inside. If anyone is getting arrested, it is him. I have half a mind to press charges for battery. You cannot just come into my family's country club and start throwing your weight around like a thug. The sheer audacity of his threat made the blood pound in my ears. I opened my mouth to correct his twisted narrative, to firmly state my credentials as a licensed financial consultant and demand a formal report. But the country club doors flew open again. My mother Brenda rushed out onto the concrete portico, frantically smoothing down her designer church suit and projecting her absolute best upper-crust society persona. She bypassed me completely and went straight to the officers, positioning herself physically next to Connor. "Officers, please excuse this absolute embarrassment." Brenda cooed, her voice practically dripping with artificial sweetness. "We are upstanding members of the community. My husband Terrence is inside wrapping up the event. This is simply a cultural family misunderstanding. Kendra has always had a flair for the dramatic and a desperate need for attention. Jada was merely showing her the cake-cutting knife for the registry photos. Nobody was in any actual danger. Please do not let my son-in-law Connor be bothered by this nonsense." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, utterly repulsed by her betrayal. She was actively protecting the man who just threatened my husband with false arrest and shielding the daughter who just threatened to carve into my womb. She prioritized Connor's perceived wealth and whiteness and Jada's curated perfection over my actual survival. She held a weapon to my uterus. "Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm and carrying clearly over the flashing police lights. She screamed that I stole her babies. "I am pressing formal charges, and I want the security footage from the ballroom subpoenaed immediately." Brenda dropped the sweet society voice, her face contorted into an ugly, hateful sneer. She marched right up to me, uncaring that the officers were watching her facade crack. "You are not pressing charges against my daughter. You have been bitterly jealous of Jada since she made the debutante cotillion and you didn't. You could never stand to see her shine. You tried to ruin her college graduation, you tried to ruin her wedding, and now you are trying to ruin her baby shower with this ridiculous, fabricated lie. You just cannot stand that she is finally getting everything she deserves." I looked at her, truly looking at the deep lines of bitterness and denial etched around her mouth. "I didn't try to ruin anything," I said, my words sharp and precise. "I survived you. I built my own wealth from the ground up, I bought my own home, and I married a man who actually protects me. You hate that I do not need your money, your validation, or your permission to exist." Brenda's eyes went completely black with rage. Her hands shook at her sides. "You arrogant, ungrateful brat! You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are no daughter of mine." "I know," I replied without shedding a single tear. I turned my back on her and faced the lead officer. I clearly and methodically recited my personal details, Jamal's contact information, and my formal unyielding demand for an incident report. I did not let Connor's privilege, his smug threats, or my mother's unhinged screaming deter me for a single second. Once the officers took our official statements and provided a report number, Jamal wrapped his arms securely around my waist and guided me to his car. We drove out of the wrought iron gates of the country club, leaving the toxic burning ashes of my family behind us. 48 hours passed. I refused to cry over Brenda's words. Crying was a luxury for people who did not have an empire to protect, and I had built a fortress. I sat in my pristine corner office at my financial consulting firm, the city skyline stretching out massively behind my desk. The glass walls and minimalist decor usually brought me a deep sense of peace. My personal phone had been blowing up for 2 days, with vicious text messages from cousins and aunts calling me a traitor for calling the cops on my pregnant sister. But I had ruthlessly blocked every single number and buried myself in analyzing quarterly market projections. The clinical silence of my office was suddenly shattered by a blaring bright red alert pinging aggressively across my dual monitors. It was a critical top-tier notification from my enterprise-level business credit monitoring software. I stopped typing immediately. My eyes locked onto the screen. Someone was actively attempting to originate a commercial business loan for $150,000 against my consulting firm. They were using my exact corporate tax identification number, my registered business address, and they were attempting to forge my digital signature on the preliminary application documents. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my professional training instantly overrode the panic. You do not build a highly successful financial consultancy by freezing under pressure. You build it by outsmarting the predator. I immediately locked down my business credit profiles with a few keystrokes, freezing the application mid-process. Then I opened my security dashboard and ran a direct aggressive trace on the IP address, initiating the fraudulent application. I watched the progress bar load on my screen, tracing the digital footprint backward through the secure financial portal. I expected to see the location data map to some offshore server or a random hacker collective trying their luck. The location data popped up on my screen, dropping a bright digital pin onto the city map. The fraudulent loan application was not coming from a random thief. The IP address mapped perfectly to a boutique commercial suite in the downtown financial district. It traced directly, undeniably, back to Connor's luxury real estate office. I stared at the digital pin glowing bright red on my monitor. Connor. The sheer audacity made my chest tighten, but panic was a luxury I could not afford. I locked my office door, pulled up my secure server, and went to work. If my brother-in-law wanted to play financial warfare with a licensed consultant, he picked the wrong woman. I started with public records. I pulled the corporate filings, property deeds, and uniform commercial code records for his primary real estate company. Connor always bragged about his sprawling portfolio at every Thanksgiving dinner, swirling his bourbon, while my mother hung on his every word as if he were a billionaire genius. It took me exactly 14 minutes to completely dismantle the illusion of his generational wealth. Connor was not a real estate mogul. He was a sinking ship. 3 of his commercial properties were in active foreclosure. His corporate credit lines were maxed out to the tune of $200,000. The old money trust he loved to casually mention to my parents had dried up years ago, bled dry by his terrible investments and Jada's absolute addiction to designer labels. They were completely and utterly broke. But broke people do not live in a gated community in Buckhead without a lifeline. I needed to know who was keeping their heads above water. A sickening realization washed over me, cold and sharp. 2 years ago, when my father Terrence had a mild heart attack, I forced him to sign over financial power of attorney to me. I took control of their retirement accounts, optimized their portfolios, and built them a nest egg that guaranteed a peaceful, secure life. I had not checked their daily balances in months because the funds were supposed to be locked in low-risk yields. I bypassed the standard login and accessed the master portal for my parents' accounts. The numbers on the screen made the breath completely leave my lungs. Gone. Nearly $500,000 carefully saved over 40 years of my father working double shifts at the manufacturing plant, and my mother teaching was just gone. I frantically traced the wire transfers. Every single month, massive sums were moved from my parents' retirement accounts directly into Connor's failing business accounts. $10,000 here for an emergency tax bill. $20,000 there for a short-term bridge loan that never got repaid. I remembered Brenda demanding I pay for her lavish 60th birthday cruise last year, snapping at me that Connor and Jada were asset-rich and cash-poor, so I needed to step up and do my part for the family. She was lying. She was funding their fake lifestyle while letting me foot the bill for her social climbing. Brenda was literally bankrupting her own husband to protect the illusion of Jada's perfect marriage to a wealthy white man. I slammed my fist against the mahogany desk. Why the sudden desperation now? Why try to steal $150,000 from my business today? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, my mind racing through the timeline. Jada's psychotic break at the country club baby shower. The cold silver of the cake knife pressed against my pregnant belly. She had screamed that I stole her life and her babies. It was never just about outshining me. Jada is deeply, viciously envious, but Connor is calculated. This was about money. In my line of work, it is always about money. I bypassed the standard financial databases and accessed the county probate and estate records for Connor's grandfather, the supposedly elite patriarch of his family. It took some digging through endless legal jargon and estate planning documents, but I finally located the original trust charter. I read the stipulations under the disbursement section and the blood froze in my veins. The trust was ironclad. Connor had been cut off from the primary principal years ago due to his reckless spending. However, there was a specific unalterable clause. A massive seven-figure lump sum would automatically disperse to Connor upon the documented birth of his first biological heir. The grandfather had explicitly earmarked the remaining fortune for the next generation. Jada did not just want a baby for the aesthetic or to compete with my twins. She needed a baby to trigger a multi-million-dollar payout. If they did not produce an heir soon, Connor's creditors would swallow them whole, and my parents would be left completely destitute, their retirement entirely wiped out by a con artist. That was why Jada lost her mind when she saw those twin onesies at the shower. The universe was handing me two babies and a stable life, while she was rapidly running out of time and stolen money to secure her one golden ticket. I hit print. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life, spitting out page after page of undeniable, devastating proof. I gathered the foreclosure notices, the wire transfer receipts from my parents' accounts, the fraudulent loan application bearing Connor's internet protocol address, and the grandfather's strict trust stipulations. I neatly arranged the pages into pristine black leather presentation folders. Brenda always loved a good Sunday dinner. She loved sitting at the head of her formal dining table, serving pot roast, and pretending her family was the absolute envy of the neighborhood. I picked up the folders and grabbed my car keys. I was about to serve them a reality check they would never forget. Jamal and I pulled into the sprawling circular driveway of my parents' suburban estate in Buckhead. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles they could not actually afford, perfectly washed and gleaming in the afternoon sun. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car, letting the engine idle for a second as I stared at the massive brick house. Jamal reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. He did not ask if I was sure about this. He already knew the answer. We got out of the car and walked up the pristine brick pathway together. I bypassed the ornate brass doorbell and used my spare key, pushing the heavy mahogany front door wide open. The house smelled overwhelmingly of the quintessential Sunday dinner. The rich aroma of smothered pork chops, candied yams, and baked macaroni and cheese drifted down the hallway, an ironic backdrop to the absolute financial slaughter I was about to unleash. I could hear the faint sound of a gospel choir playing on the living room television. They had all just gotten back from church and were undoubtedly still wearing their Sunday best, performing their roles as the most blessed and highly favored family in the congregation. I walked straight into the formal dining room without bothering to take off my coat. The lively conversation stopped the exact second my heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Brenda was sitting at the head of the table in a lavender silk suit and a matching wide-brimmed hat, holding court like a queen. Terrence sat opposite her, quietly carving a roast. Jada sat next to Connor, wearing a pastel maternity dress that probably cost a month of my father's pension. They looked like a magazine spread of generational wealth and perfect harmony. I did not say hello. I walked directly to the center of the long dining table and tossed the thick black leather presentation folders onto the polished wood. The heavy thud rattled the expensive crystal glasses and splashed a thick drop of brown gravy directly onto my mother's pristine white tablecloth. "What in the world is wrong with you?" Brenda snapped, her eyes flashing with immediate irritation as she dabbed at the gravy stain with a linen napkin. "We are eating. You do not just storm into my house and disrupt our Sunday dinner after the shameful stunt you pulled at the country club." "Dad," I said, completely ignoring her and locking my eyes onto Terrence. "When was the last time you checked the balances on your Vanguard retirement accounts?" Terrence paused with the carving knife still in his hand. He blinked, clearly confused by the question. "I check the quarterly statements when they come in the mail, Kendra. Why are you coming into my house talking about my finances?" "Because your mail is being intercepted," I said, my voice cutting through the room with cold, clinical precision. I reached forward and flipped open the first black folder. I slid the highlighted bank statements right past the gravy boat, stopping them inches from my father's plate. "You do not have a retirement account anymore, Dad. You have a shell. Over the past 14 months, nearly $500,000 has been systematically wired out of your portfolio and dumped directly into the operating accounts for Connor's real estate business." Terrence stared at the papers. His jaw went slack. The carving knife slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly against the serving platter. Connor's face lost all of its color. The smug old money arrogance he always wore like a shield vanished, instantly replaced by the cornered look of a desperate criminal. Jada shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly finding her manicured nails fascinating. "Those are private business loans," Connor stammered, his voice lacking its usual smooth authority. "Terrence and I have a private arrangement. You have absolutely no right to hack into our financial records. That is a federal crime. Kendra and I will press charges." I laughed, a harsh and completely humorless sound. "I did not hack anything. I pulled your corporate public records, Connor." I opened the second folder and tossed the documents onto the table. "3 of your commercial properties are in active foreclosure. Your business credit lines are maxed out to the tune of $200,000. Your family trust fund dried up 3 years ago. You are not a real estate mogul. You are a broke con artist bleeding my father dry to fund Jada's shopping addiction." Terrence picked up the bank statements, his hands shaking violently as his eyes scanned the highlighted numbers. His chest began to heave as the reality of his lifetime of hard work vanishing into thin air hit him. "Brenda," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "Brenda, what is this? Did you know about this?" I braced myself for my mother to finally turn her wrath onto the man who had just destroyed her financial security. I expected her to scream at Connor, to demand her money back, to throw him out of her house. Instead, Brenda stood up, smoothed down the skirt of her lavender suit, and pointed an accusing finger directly at my face. "Connor just had a bad quarter," Brenda yelled, her voice echoing aggressively off the high dining room ceiling. "We are family, Kendra, and we share. We support our own. Not like you hoarding your wealth in your gated community, while your sister struggles to buy a basic designer stroller. Marcus is a brilliant businessman, and he is going to pay us back with interest once his new development breaks ground." I stared at her, utterly repulsed by the depth of her delusion. "A basic designer stroller," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. "Mother, you forced Dad to work double shifts at the manufacturing plant, so Jada could have a month-long European graduation trip while I was taking out high-interest student loans just to buy used textbooks. You told me I had to struggle to build character, but you let this arrogant failure drain Dad's entire life savings so Jada can pretend she married into high society. You are literally bankrupting your own husband to protect the illusion of Jada's perfect life. You do not know anything about high society or family loyalty," Brenda shrieked, slamming her hands down on the table. "You are a bitter, vindictive child. Connor is the best thing that ever happened to this family. He brings us status. He elevates our name in the community. You are just trying to ruin them because you are terrified that Jada is going to have a boy and secure the family bloodline before you do." I opened the third folder. "Jada is not securing a bloodline, Mother. She is trying to secure a ransom." I slid the trust fund documentation across the table. Connor's grandfather left a strict clause in his estate. Connor only gets his multi-million-dollar payout upon the documented birth of his first biological heir. That is why Jada pulled a knife on me at the country club. She does not care about being a mother. She cares about beating the ticking clock before Connor's creditors seize the house you are sitting in right now. And just to prove how desperate they are, Connor tried to originate a fraudulent business loan for $150,000 against my consulting firm 48 hours ago. Terrence clutched his chest, sinking heavily back into his dining chair. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. All my money, he gasped. My pension. It is all gone. Connor stood up, his face twisted into an ugly sneer as he desperately tried to regain control of the room. You have no proof I submitted that application. You are completely out of your depth, Kendra. I am going to call my lawyers right now, and by tomorrow morning, you will be stripped of your financial licenses. You think you can waltz in here and dictate what Terrence does with his money. It is his cash. If he wants to invest it in my company, you cannot stop him. I looked down at my father, who was openly weeping into his hands. And then I looked dead into Connor's panicked blue eyes. 2 years ago, when Dad had his heart scare, he begged me to get his affairs in order because he knew I was the only person in this family who actually understood money. I said my words dripping with absolute finality. He signed a durable, irrevocable power of attorney over all his assets, naming me as the primary fiduciary. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. You did what? I did not just look at your accounts today, Dad. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on Connor. I froze them. I locked every single asset, every savings account, every checking account, and every line of credit. I invoked my legal authority this morning. You cannot give Connor another dime, and Connor cannot access a single cent of your money ever again. The bank is cutting off the life support. You two are officially cut off. Jada let out a piercing, unhinged scream that shattered the remaining tension in the room. The mask completely fell off Connor's face. His polished old money persona vanished, replaced by pure violent desperation. He cursed loudly, kicked his chair backward, and lunged violently across the dining table. He knocked over the gravy boat and sent crystal wine glasses shattering onto the floor as he reached his hands directly toward my pregnant belly. I never even made it halfway. Jamal moved with the terrifying, flawless precision of a man who had been waiting for an excuse. He stepped entirely in front of me, a solid wall of pure muscle. Jamal grabbed Connor by the throat with one hand, lifting him slightly off his feet, and slammed him backward with bone-crushing force. Connor crashed hard against the antique mahogany china cabinet, the impact shaking the fine china inside. Jamal leaned in, his forearm pressed firmly against Connor's collarbone, pinning him to the glass doors. Do not ever think about breathing in my wife's direction again, Jamal whispered, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. If you even look at her shadow, I will put you in the ground. Do you understand me? Connor gasped for air, his face turning purple as he scrambled to pull Jamal's arm away. But he was completely overpowered. He nodded frantically, his eyes wide with genuine terror. Jamal held him there for 2 more agonizing seconds before dropping him like a sack of trash onto the dining room rug. I picked up my purse and adjusted my coat. Enjoy your Sunday dinner, I said to the silent, horrified room. I turned and walked out of the house with my husband, leaving them in the ruins of their financial destruction. But cornered animals are the most dangerous, and by the next morning Jada would launch a retaliation so vicious and highly produced that it would turn my entire community against me. Monday morning arrived with the violent buzzing of my cell phone against the granite kitchen counter. I was pouring my second cup of coffee before heading to my firm when the screen lit up with a rapid-fire succession of text messages. They were not from my clients or my colleagues. They were from cousins I had not spoken to in years, church members I only saw on holidays, and relatives who usually ignored my existence. The previews on my lock screen were a barrage of pure venom. Words like monster, sociopath, and murderer flashed across the glass. Jamal walked into the kitchen, his jaw tight and his face set in a rigid mask of absolute fury. He did not say a word. He just turned his tablet around and slid it across the island toward me. Jada had gone live on social media. I pressed play and watched my sister deliver the performance of a lifetime. She was sitting on a sterile white bed with a pale blue blanket pulled up to her waist, heavily implying she was in a hospital room. Her usually flawless silk press was purposely disheveled and pinned back. She wore absolutely no makeup, completely washing out her complexion to look frail, though I could clearly see the subtle, expert use of contouring powder to create hollow, dark circles under her eyes. Connor sat right behind her, his hand resting heavily on her shoulder. He was playing the stoic, grieving white husband to absolute perfection, staring blankly at the floor, as if the weight of the world had just crushed him. Jada looked directly into the camera, her bottom lip trembling as she choked out a highly calculated sob. My sister Kendra attacked me yesterday. Jada wept, her voice cracking in a pitch-perfect display of agony. She stormed into my parents' home during our sacred Sunday dinner. She violently threatened my husband, and she completely cut off my elderly parents from their own life savings out of pure spiteful greed. The financial abuse she inflicted on our family was terrifying, but the physical trauma was too much for my body to handle. Jada paused, bringing a trembling hand up to cover her mouth as a single tear rolled down her cheek. Connor pulled her closer, burying his face in her shoulder. I lost my baby. Jada cried, staring into the lens. I lost my precious angel last night because of the extreme stress and the violent environment my own sister created. My baby is gone. The video ended. It had been uploaded exactly 2 hours ago, and the view count was already climbing into the tens of thousands. My mother Brenda had not just watched the video, she had actively weaponized it. She shared the link directly to the First Zion Baptist Church community page, the local neighborhood watchboards, and every single extended family group chat in her contacts. Brenda had activated the church prayer warriors, an incredibly efficient network of gossips who thrived on righteous indignation. My phone rang loudly, breaking the silence in the kitchen. It was Aunt Denise. I answered and put the phone on speaker without saying a word. You are a demon from the lowest pit of hell, Aunt Denise screamed through the speaker, her voice shrill and shaking with rage. You marched into your father's house and killed your own niece. You killed that innocent baby because you could never stand to see Jada happy. You have been jealous of that girl your entire life, and now you have blood on your hands. Do not ever show your face at church or anywhere near this family again. I tapped the screen and disconnected the call. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream or throw my coffee mug against the wall. Instead, a cold, clinical calm washed over me. Jada had always been a master of manipulation. When we were teenagers, she would purposely trip over her own feet, scrape her knee on the pavement, and cry hysterically to our father that I had pushed her down the stairs. Terrence would ground me for a month without ever asking a single question, and Jada would steal my car keys the second he turned his back. But faking a miscarriage to thousands of people to cover up her husband's financial crimes was a completely new level of sociopathic behavior. She is trying to destroy you publicly so you will cave privately, Jamal said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes burning with protective rage as he stared at the tablet. Connor knows he cannot beat you in a boardroom, so he is using his wife to assassinate your character in the community. I will call my lawyers right now. We are hitting them with a defamation suit by noon. No, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. Let them talk. Defamation is a civil matter, and it takes months to litigate. Jada and Connor do not have months. They do not even have weeks. They are completely broke. Their properties are in foreclosure, and I just cut off their only cash supply. Cornered rats do not strategize. They panic. This video is not just a smear campaign, it is a setup. They want something from me right now. Right on cue, the security chime echoed through our house. The perimeter alert indicated someone was at our front gates. Jamal pulled up the security camera feed on the wall monitor. A man in a cheap gray suit was standing on our front porch holding a thick manila envelope. He was not a neighbor, and he certainly was not family. Jamal and I walked to the foyer together. I opened the heavy front door just enough to look the man in the eye. Kendra Washington, the man asked, holding out the envelope. I am Kendra, I replied. You have been served, he said smoothly. He dropped the envelope directly onto the welcome mat, turned around, and jogged back to his sedan parked at the curb. Jamal picked up the envelope, ripped it open, and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. He scanned the first page, his jaw tightening so hard the muscles jumped in his cheek. He handed the papers to me. It was a formal civil lawsuit filed in the county superior court. Connor had clearly leveraged the last remaining shreds of his family's old money connections to hire the most aggressive, high-priced litigation firm in the city. The lawsuit named me and Jamal as the primary defendants. They were suing us for a staggering $500,000. The charges listed were intentional infliction of emotional distress, financial abuse of vulnerable elders, and the wrongful death of an unborn child. I read through the legal jargon with the detached precision of a financial consultant, auditing a fraudulent ledger. Connor was leaning entirely into his white privilege. He was banking on the fact that the legal system would automatically validate his victimhood and view Jamal as the violent, aggressive black man who caused his wife to miscarry. Connor assumed I would be so terrified of the social backlash and the looming court battle that I would simply fold. But it was the cover letter stapled to the front of the lawsuit that made a sharp, predatory smile form on my lips. Connor's high-priced lawyers had drafted a formal settlement offer. The letter explicitly stated that the emotional trauma of a highly publicized trial would be devastating to my elderly parents and my grieving sister. Therefore, the plaintiffs were willing to withdraw the $500,000 lawsuit, entirely drop all public allegations, and sign a non-disclosure agreement under one strict condition. I had to immediately relinquish my legal power of attorney, unfreeze Terrence and Brenda's retirement accounts, and permanently remove my name from all of their financial assets within 24 hours. I set the papers down on the entryway console. It was a brilliantly bold extortion attempt disguised as a legal settlement. They did not actually want $500,000 from me. They knew a wrongful death suit over a miscarriage would require extensive medical discovery expert testimony and months of litigation they could not afford. They just wanted the lock taken off my parents' bank accounts, so Connor could finish draining the remaining $500,000 to save his failing real estate business. They think you are going to panic and sign away the power of attorney to make the social media mob go away, Jamal said, reading the settlement terms over my shoulder. They think you are weak. I looked at the settlement letter, and then I looked up at my husband. They think I am going to play defense, I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. But Connor forgot one massive detail. He is treating this like a legal dispute. I am treating this like an audit, and an audit requires receipts. I picked up my phone, completely ignoring the hundreds of hateful notifications still pouring in from my mother's church friends. I bypassed my contacts for corporate attorneys and scrolled down to a number I had saved years ago for high-level corporate background checks. It was time to hire a private investigator. If Jada wanted to use medical trauma to extort me for $500,000, I was going to find out exactly which doctor signed off on her fake miscarriage. The heavy manila envelope containing the lawsuit sat on my pristine kitchen island like a venomous snake preparing to strike. $500,000 for emotional distress and the wrongful death of an unborn child. Connor and his high-priced attorneys actually believed this stack of legal threats would send me spiraling into submission. They expected me to panic, pick up the phone, and beg for a settlement that involved unfreezing my parents' retirement accounts. They fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I did not hire a defense attorney. Defense attorneys are trained to settle to mitigate risk and to find the quietest way out of a public scandal. I did not want a quiet exit. I wanted absolute, undeniable destruction of their narrative. Instead of calling a law firm, I called Desmond Tyrell. Desmond was a former federal fraud investigator who now ran an elite private intelligence agency out of downtown Atlanta. He specialized in corporate espionage, asset tracking, and dismantling extortion plots for high-net-worth clients. I had retained his services twice before for my consulting firm to vet potential merger partners who seemed a little too good to be true. He was ruthless, discreet, and devastatingly thorough. I met Desmond at a nondescript coffee shop across town, far away from the prying eyes of my mother's church friends and the social circles currently crucifying me online. I slid the lawsuit across the table. I need you to tear this apart, I told him, keeping my voice low and level over the background noise of the espresso machines. My sister released a viral video claiming she miscarried her baby due to the stress of a family argument. Her husband is using that video to sue me for $500,000, offering to drop the suit only if I give him access to my parents' frozen financial portfolios. Desmond skimmed the first page of the legal filing, his sharp brown eyes catching every detail. He did not ask me how I felt about being called a murderer on the internet. He only cared about the data. "This is an extortion play," Desmond said, tapping a thick finger against the settlement clause. "They are banking on the court of public opinion forcing your hand before this ever sees a judge." If she had a documented miscarriage resulting from a physical altercation, There would be a police report and criminal battery charges filed against you. They bypassed the police and went straight to civil litigation because the burden of proof is lower. I need a medical release to pull her hospital admittance records. She will never sign a release, I replied. Desmond offered a cold, professional smile. I do not need her signature. I just need to know which hospital she claims treated her, and I will find the leaks in her timeline. Give me 48 hours. I left the coffee shop and drove back to my gated community. The neighborhood was usually a sanctuary of quiet tree-lined streets and perfectly manicured lawns, but today, the atmosphere felt entirely different. Jamal was waiting for me in the driveway, his truck parked at an angle that deliberately blocked the path to our front door. When I walked inside, the foyer looked like a construction zone. Jamal had completely stripped the hardware off our heavy double doors. He was actively installing biometric deadbolts, reinforced titanium strike plates, and shatterproof security film over the side light windows. A stack of high-definition night vision cameras sat on the entryway console waiting to be mounted along the roofline. You think they are going to escalate from serving lawsuits to physical trespassing? I asked, stepping over a power drill. Jamal did not look up from the lock mechanism he was securing into the door frame. Connor is a desperate man bleeding out financially, and your sister is completely unhinged. People who have nothing left to lose will try to take everything you have. We are not leaving the safety of this house to chance. I want a camera covering every single inch of this property, and I want the footage backing up to an encrypted cloud server. I watched the muscles in my husband's back tense as he drove a 3-inch steel screw into the doorframe. His protective rage was a silent, heavy presence in the house. I walked over and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. My mother faked a heart arrhythmia. The morning of my high school valedictory speech, I said quietly, the memory surfacing with sudden bitter clarity. Jamal paused the drill and turned his head to look at me. I had secured a full academic scholarship to college. I continued, my voice entirely detached from the pain of the past. The ceremony was at 10 in the morning. At 8:30, Brenda suddenly collapsed in the kitchen, clutching her chest and gasping for air. The paramedics rushed to the house. They ran an electrocardiogram right there in the living room and found her blood pressure and heart rate perfectly normal. They told her it was likely just indigestion or mild anxiety. But she refused to listen. She screamed that she was dying and demanded Terrence drive her to the emergency room immediately. She dragged Jada into the car with her, crying that she needed her eldest daughter by her side. Jamal stood up, his jaw set in a hard line. So neither of them had to sit in the audience and watch you succeed. Exactly, I said. I gave my speech to an auditorium of cheering families while looking at 3 empty folding chairs in the second row. Brenda miraculously recovered the exact second my graduation ceremony ended. The hospital discharged her with a clean bill of health and a recommendation for antacids. Jada learned a very valuable lesson that day. She learned that a sudden medical emergency is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. It immediately forces everyone to stop holding you accountable and redirects all the sympathy and attention right back to you. Jamal pulled me into his chest, wrapping his arms securely around me and resting his chin on the top of my head. They are not playing those sick games with our family, he murmured fiercely. Let your mother and your sister spin their toxic webs. They cannot breach these walls. For the next 2 days, I completely ignored the outside world. I did not log on to social media. I did not answer unknown phone calls. I sat in my fortified home working remotely, protecting my peace and my unborn twins. On the morning of the 3rd day, my secure phone rang. It was Desmond Tyrell. I need you at my office right now, Desmond said. His voice lacked its usual smooth professional cadence. He sounded urgent, almost disturbed. I am not discussing this over an open cellular network. Get here safely and make sure you are not being followed. The drive to Desmond's office took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind raced through every terrible possibility. Had Connor bribed a doctor to falsify medical records? Had Jada actually injured herself deliberately to frame me? Desmond's office was located in a sleek, highly secure corporate building. I bypassed the receptionist and walked directly into his private suite. I was standing by his large glass desk, holding a thick manila folder. He did not offer me a coffee or exchange pleasantries. He just dropped the folder onto the desk and stepped back. I opened it. The first document was a comprehensive medical background check. Desmond had pulled the employment and licensing history of the physician, whose signature appeared at the bottom of Connor's legal threat. The doctor who supposedly treated your sister's miscarriage is a disgraced practitioner, Desmond explained, pointing to a highlighted section of a state medical board disciplinary ruling. He lost his medical license 2 years ago for running a prescription pill mill out of a strip mall clinic. He is currently under federal investigation for insurance fraud. Connor likely paid him a few $1,000s under the table to draft a fake medical evaluation on stolen hospital letterhead. I stared at the disciplinary ruling. The lawsuit is a complete fabrication. It gets significantly worse, Desmond said. He reached into the folder and pulled out a stack of 8 by 10 glossy photographs. He spread them out across the glass desk. The first row of photos were high-resolution screenshots taken directly from Jada's public social media accounts. They were the ultrasound images she had posted 2 months ago when she triumphantly announced her pregnancy to the world. The images showed a perfectly healthy fetus, complete with timestamps and medical text at the margins. Jada had captioned them, calling the baby her miracle angel. Desmond then pulled out a second stack of photographs and laid them directly beneath Jada's images. I looked down at the second row of photos, and all the air violently left my lungs. The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the glass desk to steady myself, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. The images in the second row were identical to Jada's. The exact same fetal positioning, the exact same shadowy artifacts in the sonogram imaging, the exact same timestamps in the upper right corner. "These are mine," I whispered, my voice trembling with a sudden overwhelming wave of violation. "These are the ultrasounds of my twins." Desmond nodded grimly. "Your sister downloaded the private ultrasound images you sent to your parents' group text chat 4 months ago. She used basic photo editing software to digitally crop out your patient identification number and your medical facility's logo. She applied a slight sepia tone filter to alter the contrast, mirrored the image horizontally, and posted them online as her own." I stared at the stolen images of my unborn children being paraded around the internet as props in my sister's psychotic delusion. "Jada did not have a miscarriage," Desmond stated, delivering the final devastating blow. "I checked every single emergency room, urgent care clinic, and private obstetrician practice within a 50-mile radius. There is absolutely no record of Jada ever being admitted. Kendra, your sister, was never pregnant." The heavy manila envelope containing the lawsuit sat on my pristine kitchen island like a venomous snake preparing to strike. $500,000 for emotional distress and the wrongful death of an unborn child. Connor and his high-priced attorneys actually believed this stack of legal threats would send me spiraling into submission. They expected me to panic, pick up the phone, and beg for a settlement that involved unfreezing my parents' retirement accounts. They fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I did not hire a defense attorney. Defense attorneys are trained to settle to mitigate risk and to find the quietest way out of a public scandal. I did not want a quiet exit. I wanted absolute, undeniable destruction of their narrative. Instead of calling a law firm, I called Desmond Tyrell. Desmond was a former federal fraud investigator who now ran an elite private intelligence agency out of downtown Atlanta. He specialized in corporate espionage, asset tracking, and dismantling extortion plots for high-net-worth clients. I had retained his services twice before for my consulting firm to vet potential merger partners who seemed a little too good to be true. He was ruthless, discreet, and devastatingly thorough. I met Desmond at a nondescript coffee shop across town, far away from the prying eyes of my mother's church friends and the social circles currently crucifying me online. I slid the lawsuit across the table. "I need you to tear this apart," I told him, keeping my voice low and level over the background noise of the espresso machines. My sister released a viral video claiming she miscarried her baby due to the stress of a family argument. Her husband is using that video to sue me for $500,000, offering to drop the suit only if I give him access to my parents' frozen financial portfolios. Desmond skimmed the first page of the legal filing, his sharp brown eyes catching every detail. He did not ask me how I felt about being called a murderer on the internet. He only cared about the data. "This is an extortion play," Desmond said, tapping a thick finger against the settlement clause. "They are banking on the court of public opinion forcing your hand before this ever sees a judge. If she had a documented miscarriage resulting from a physical altercation, there would be a police report and criminal battery charges filed against you." They bypassed the police and went straight to civil litigation because the burden of proof is lower. "I need a medical release to pull her hospital admittance records." "She will never sign a release," I replied. Desmond offered a cold, professional smile. "I do not need her signature. I just need to know which hospital she claims treated her, and I will find the leaks in her timeline. Give me 48 hours. I left the coffee shop and drove back to my gated community. The neighborhood was usually a sanctuary of quiet, tree-lined streets and perfectly manicured lawns. But today, the atmosphere felt entirely different. Jamal was waiting for me in the driveway, his truck parked at an angle that deliberately blocked the path to our front door. When I walked inside, the foyer looked like a construction zone. Jamal had completely stripped the hardware off our heavy double doors. I was actively installing biometric deadbolts, reinforced titanium strike plates, and shatterproof security film over the sidelight windows. A stack of high-definition night vision cameras sat on the entryway console waiting to be mounted along the roofline. "You think they are going to escalate from serving lawsuits to physical trespassing?" I asked, stepping over a power drill. Jamal did not look up from the lock mechanism he was securing into the door frame. "Connor is a desperate man bleeding out financially, and your sister is completely unhinged. People who have nothing left to lose will try to take everything you have. We are not leaving the safety of this house to chance. I want a camera covering every single inch of this property, and I want the footage backing up to an encrypted cloud server." I watched the muscles in my husband's back tense as he drove a 3-inch steel screw into the door frame. His protective rage was a silent, heavy presence in the house. I walked over and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "My mother faked a heart arrhythmia. The morning of my high school valedictory speech," I said quietly, the memory surfacing with sudden, bitter clarity. Jamal paused the drill and turned his head to look at me. "I had secured a full academic scholarship to college." I continued, my voice entirely detached from the pain of the past. "The ceremony was at 10 in the morning. At 8:30, Brenda suddenly collapsed in the kitchen, clutching her chest and gasping for air. The paramedics rushed to the house. They ran an electrocardiogram right there in the living room and found her blood pressure and heart rate perfectly normal. They told her it was likely just indigestion or mild anxiety, but she refused to listen. She screamed that she was dying and demanded Terrence drive her to the emergency room immediately. She dragged Jada into the car with her, crying that she needed her eldest daughter by her side. Jamal stood up, his jaw set in a hard line. "So neither of them had to sit in the audience and watch you succeed." "Exactly," I said. I gave my speech to an auditorium of cheering families while looking at 3 empty folding chairs in the second row. Brenda miraculously recovered the exact second my graduation ceremony ended. The hospital discharged her with a clean bill of health and a recommendation for antacids. Jada learned a very valuable lesson that day. She learned that a sudden medical emergency is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. It immediately forces everyone to stop holding you accountable and redirects all the sympathy and attention right back to you. Jamal pulled me into his chest, wrapping his arms securely around me and resting his chin on the top of my head. "They are not playing those sick games with our family," he murmured fiercely. "Let your mother and your sister spin their toxic webs. They cannot breach these walls." For the next 2 days, I completely ignored the outside world. I did not log on to social media. I did not answer unknown phone calls. I sat in my fortified home, working remotely, protecting my peace and my unborn twins. On the morning of the 3rd day, my secure phone rang. It was Desmond Tyrell. "I need you at my office right now," Desmond said. His voice lacked its usual smooth, professional cadence. He sounded urgent, almost disturbed. "I am not discussing this over an open cellular network. Get here safely and make sure you are not being followed." The drive to Desmond's office took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind raced through every terrible possibility. Had Connor bribed a doctor to falsify medical records? Had Jada actually injured herself deliberately to frame me? Desmond's office was located in a sleek, highly secure corporate building. I bypassed the receptionist and walked directly into his private suite. He was standing by his large glass desk, holding a thick manila folder. He did not offer me a coffee or exchange pleasantries. He just dropped the folder onto the desk and stepped back. I opened it. The first document was a comprehensive medical background check. Desmond had pulled the employment and licensing history of the physician, whose signature appeared at the bottom of Connor's legal threat. The doctor who supposedly treated your sister's miscarriage is a disgraced practitioner, Desmond explained, pointing to a highlighted section of a state medical board disciplinary ruling. He lost his medical license 2 years ago for running a prescription pill mill out of a strip mall clinic. He is currently under federal investigation for insurance fraud. Connor likely paid him a few $1,000s under the table to draft a fake medical evaluation on stolen hospital letterhead. I stared at the disciplinary ruling. The lawsuit is a complete fabrication. It gets significantly worse, Desmond said. He reached into the folder and pulled out a stack of 8 by 10 glossy photographs. He spread them out across the glass desk. The first row of photos were high-resolution screenshots taken directly from Jada's public social media accounts. They were the ultrasound images she had posted 2 months ago, when she triumphantly announced her pregnancy to the world. The images showed a perfectly healthy fetus, complete with timestamps and medical text at the margins. Jada had captioned them, calling the baby her miracle angel. Desmond then pulled out a second stack of photographs and laid them directly beneath Jada's images. I looked down at the second row of photos and all the air violently left my lungs. The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the glass desk to steady myself, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. The images in the second row were identical to Jada's. The exact same fetal positioning, the exact same shadowy artifacts in the sonogram imaging, the exact same timestamps in the upper right corner. "These are mine," I whispered, my voice trembling with a sudden, overwhelming wave of violation. "These are the ultrasounds of my twins." Desmond nodded grimly. "Your sister downloaded the private ultrasound images you sent to your parents' group text chat 4 months ago. She used basic photo editing software to digitally crop out your patient identification number and your medical facility's logo. She applied a slight sepia tone filter to alter the contrast, mirrored the image horizontally, and posted them online as her own. I stared at the stolen images of my unborn children being paraded around the internet as props in my sister's psychotic delusion. Jada did not have a miscarriage, Desmond stated, delivering the final devastating blow. I checked every single emergency room, urgent care clinic, and private obstetrician practice within a 50-mile radius. There is absolutely no record of Jada ever being admitted. Kendra, your sister, was never pregnant. I stared at the medical records and the manipulated ultrasound images spread across Desmond's glass desk. My own unborn twins stolen and paraded across the internet to fuel my sister's psychotic narrative. The sheer magnitude of the violation threatened to suffocate me, but I forced air into my lungs. I did not have time to be a victim. Desmond remained perfectly still, watching me process the revelation. Then he reached back into his heavy manila folder. "I am afraid that is not the end of it," he said, his voice dropping to a grim register. "If this was just a financial scam to trigger Connor's family trust fund, the fake miscarriage video would be their exit strategy. They would collect the sympathy drop out of the public eye and use the lawsuit to extort you for the cash they desperately need. But Jada is not acting like a woman who just faked a tragedy to escape a lie." He slid a third stack of high-resolution surveillance photographs across the desk. The timestamp in the corner of the images read, "Yesterday afternoon, exactly 6 hours after Jada posted her viral tearful miscarriage video to her church group." I looked down at the photos. The image captured Jada walking out of a high-end luxury baby boutique in the affluent Buckhead shopping district. She was holding 2 large shopping bags filled with premium infant clothing. But that was not what made the blood freeze in my veins. Jada was wearing a fitted pale pink maternity dress. Beneath the fabric, her stomach was perfectly round, prominent, and undeniably pregnant. "She is still wearing the bump," I whispered, a profound sense of horror washing over me. Desmond tapped the photograph with his index finger. "It is a medical-grade silicone prosthetic." The boutique staff confirmed she spent over $2,000 on newborn essentials, paying entirely in cash to avoid a paper trail. She told the sales associates she was expecting twins. My hands started to shake, not from fear, but from a primal protective rage. Jada was not just running a financial con with Connor. She was deeply, dangerously obsessed. When we were kids, Brenda used to let Jada go into my room and take whatever she wanted. If I won a spelling bee, Jada would suddenly demand a new designer wardrobe to soothe her fragile self-esteem, and my parents would happily oblige. If I bought a new dress with my own allowance, Jada would steal it, stretch it out, and wear it to church while Brenda praised her style. She had spent her entire life believing that anything I earned, anything I created, and anything I loved inherently belonged to her. But this was not a dress or a high school award. These were my children. I shoved the surveillance photos back into the folder and stood up. Send the complete digital dossier to my secure server immediately, I told Desmond. Bill my firm for your absolute highest premium. You just saved my family. I walked out of his office and got straight into my car, locking the doors before I even started the engine. I dialed Jamal on our encrypted line. He answered on the first ring, the sound of his power drill humming in the background as he continued fortifying our home security. She was never pregnant, I stated, skipping any pleasantries. The ultrasounds she posted are mine. She cropped my patient ID off the images and flipped them. The line went dead silent. The drill stopped. When Jamal finally spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. Are you telling me that woman pointed a knife at your stomach while claiming you stole her babies, knowing full well her own womb was completely empty? It gets worse, I said, merging onto the highway. She faked the miscarriage online to ruin me socially, but Desmond got surveillance photos of her shopping at a luxury baby boutique yesterday. She is still wearing a silicone prosthetic belly in public, Jamal. She told the cashier she is expecting twins. I heard the sound of heavy metal hitting the floor on the other end of the line. Jamal had dropped his tools. They are not just trying to extort us for the retirement accounts, he said, piecing the horrifying reality together. Connor needs a baby to trigger his grandfather's trust fund payout. Jada is completely unhinged and obsessed with your life. Kendra, they are not planning to walk away from this. She is building a nursery. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The $500,000 lawsuit was nothing but a smokescreen. Connor's high-priced lawyers filed a civil suit for emotional distress because they knew it would terrify the average person. But civil suits require a phase of legal discovery. If I fought the lawsuit in court, Connor and Jada would be legally compelled to provide medical records of the pregnancy and the miscarriage. They would be forced to submit to depositions under oath. They have absolutely no intention of letting this go to trial. I said, my mind racing through the financial and legal strategy. Connor knows discovery would expose the prosthetic, the stolen ultrasounds, and the disgraced doctor he bribed. The lawsuit is a pure intimidation tactic. They want me to panic about the public backlash and the legal fees. They want me to sign a settlement agreement that unfreezes my parents' assets behind closed doors so Connor can steal the rest of Terrence's pension. And what happens when Connor gets the money? Jamal asked, his protective instincts sharpening into absolute focus. They still need a baby to get the trust fund millions. Jada is walking around town pretending she is still carrying twins. What is their endgame? They are buying time, I replied, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. But they are completely out of it. Connor's creditors are closing in, and I hold the keys to the only bank accounts they can drain. We are not waiting for them to make the next move. We are going to end this right now. I arrived back at our gated community and pulled into the garage. Jamal was waiting for me in the kitchen, his posture rigid, his eyes dark with a fierce, uncompromising resolve. I laid Desmond's entire file out on our granite island. We spent the next hour meticulously reviewing every forged document, every surveillance photo, and every IP trace. I pulled out my phone. I am setting the trap, I told Jamal. I opened my messages and navigated to Connor's contact. I needed to play the exact role they expected me to play. I needed to sound like the exhausted, socially defeated scapegoat who had finally cracked under the pressure of Brenda's relentless smear campaign. Connor's ego was massive and his entitlement was his greatest blind spot. If he believed he had successfully bullied me into submission, he would walk right into the slaughterhouse with a smile on his face. I typed out the message with deliberate precision. Connor, the social media harassment is out of control. Mom has the entire church board calling my office and threatening to boycott my business. I cannot handle a public trial or a media circus right now. My firm's reputation will not survive the allegations in your lawsuit. I am willing to discuss the settlement terms regarding my parents' financial portfolios, but I refuse to do this through a mediator who might leak the details. Meet me at my consulting firm's boardroom tomorrow at noon for a private out-of-court mediation. Bring your lawyers. We sign the non-disclosure agreements. I relinquish the power of attorney, and you drop the lawsuit immediately. One strict condition: do not bring my mother or my father. If Brenda steps foot in my building, the deal is off. I hit send. Jamal stood beside me watching the screen. He is going to think he broke you, Jamal said, a grim, satisfied smile forming on his lips. He is going to walk into your firm thinking he just secured $500,000 of your father's money. I watched the delivery receipt change to read. 3 tense minutes passed. Then the typing bubble appeared on my screen. Connor was taking the bait. He was likely sitting in his foreclosed real estate office popping a bottle of cheap champagne, thinking his white privilege and his wife's psychotic manipulation had successfully bulldozed the black woman who dared to tell him no. My phone buzzed. The reply was short, smug, and dripping with arrogant victory. Smart choice, Kendra. See you at noon. Have the asset transfer paperwork ready. My lawyers do not like to be kept waiting. I locked my phone and slid it across the kitchen island. I looked at the surveillance photo of my sister wearing a fake pregnancy belly, parading around town with a sickness I could barely comprehend. Then I looked at the forged loan application Connor had tried to pin on my business. I will have the paperwork ready, I said quietly to the empty room. But you are not walking out of my boardroom with a settlement. You are walking out with nothing but the clothes on your back. I turned to Jamal. Call building security at my firm. Tell them to clear the executive floor for tomorrow at noon. We are going to lock the doors, and we are going to show Connor exactly what happens when you try to extort a financial consultant using stolen medical records. The white knight routine ends tomorrow. Promptly at noon, the heavy frosted glass doors of my consulting firm swung open. I sat at the head of the 20-foot solid mahogany conference table, my hands folded perfectly over a single black leather portfolio. Connor walked into the executive boardroom, flanked by 2 men in immaculate charcoal suits. He wore a tailored navy blazer and a smug, practiced expression of profound grief, mixed with wealthy indignation. He truly believed he was walking into a surrender ceremony. Connor did not bother to introduce his legal counsel. He simply pulled out a leather executive chair, dropped his weight into it, and carelessly hoisted his expensive Italian leather loafers right onto the polished mahogany surface of my conference table. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together behind his head, projecting the absolute confidence of a man who had never been told no and had it stick. "We are doing you a massive favor by keeping this out of the courts," Kendra Connor began, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "Your mother is an absolute wreck. Brenda called me 3 times this morning, crying her eyes out over the stress you are putting this family through. She had to take a sedative just to get through her church committee meeting. I am willing to drop the $500,000 wrongful death suit today and sign a full non-disclosure agreement. All you have to do is sign the asset release forms, unfreeze Terrence and Brenda's retirement accounts, and step down as their power of attorney. Spare your mother the public grief of a trial. Just do what you are told for once." The lawyer on his right, a sharp-featured man gripping a thick briefcase, slid a stack of settlement documents across the length of the table. It stopped mere inches from my folded hands. I looked at the settlement papers. Then I looked at Connor's shoes resting on my table. I stood up slowly, picking up a small remote control resting near my coffee mug. I walked over to the heavy oak double doors of the boardroom, grasped the brushed steel handles, and pushed them firmly shut. I reached up and turned the solid brass deadbolt. The heavy metallic click echoed loudly in the cavernous room. The lawyer on the left frowned, sitting up slightly straighter. "There is no need to lock the doors." "Doors, Miss Washington. We are just here to facilitate a smooth signature process." "I am not here to sign anything," I said, my voice eerily calm as I walked back to the head of the table. "I am here to conduct a forensic audit of your client's extortion attempt." I pressed a button on the remote. The motorized shades on the floor-to-ceiling windows immediately glided downward, plunging the boardroom into a dramatic, tense dimness. A massive high-definition projector screen descended silently from a hidden compartment in the ceiling. Connor let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "What is this, Kendra? Another one of your dramatic little presentations. You cannot PowerPoint your way out of a lawsuit. Your husband assaulted my pregnant wife and killed my child. Sign the paper or we are going to the press." I pressed the remote again. The projector flared to life, illuminating the dark room with a blinding white light. "Let us start with federal wire fraud," I announced, my voice cutting through the space like a scalpel. The screen displayed the fraudulent business loan application submitted against my consulting firm 2 days ago. Next to it was the highly detailed technical trace report Desmond had compiled. It showed the exact Internet Protocol address, the timestamp, and the physical geolocation of the computer used to originate the application. The lawyer on the right adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen. "What is this?" "This is your client, attempting to steal $150,000 using my corporate tax identification number," I explained smoothly. "The IP address maps directly to his foreclosed real estate office in the financial district. That is a Class B felony." Connor dropped his feet from the table. His smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "You cannot prove I sat at that computer. My office has a dozen employees. You are reaching Kendra." I hit the remote a second time. "We can let the federal investigators sort out the loan fraud. Let us move on to the civil extortion and medical perjury." The screen changed. 2 sets of ultrasound images appeared side by side. On the left were the images Jada had posted to her social media accounts to announce her pregnancy. On the right were the exact same images, complete with my personal medical identification number, the name of my obstetrician, and the original timestamps from 4 months ago. "Your client is suing me for the wrongful death of an unborn child," I said, looking directly at the 2 lawyers, whose faces were rapidly losing color. "But Jada was never pregnant. She downloaded my private medical records from a family group chat, cropped out my patient data, applied a sepia filter, and posted my twins as her own." The lawyer on the left snatched the settlement documents off the table and shoved them back into his briefcase. He turned to Connor, his voice dropping to a harsh, panicked whisper. "Did you fabricate a pregnancy for a civil suit? You told us you had medical records verifying the miscarriage." "I do have medical records." Connor snapped his face, turning an angry, mottled red. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and slammed it onto the table. "I have a signed evaluation from Dr. Eris Thorne confirming the physical trauma and the loss of the fetus. She is making this up to save her own skin." I pressed the remote for the 3rd time. The screen flashed to the State Medical Board disciplinary ruling for Dr. Eris Thorne, highlighting his revoked license and the active federal investigation into his prescription fraud ring. "Your star medical witness lost his license 2 years ago for running a pill mill," I stated coldly. "Connor paid a disgraced, unlicensed criminal to draft a fake medical evaluation on stolen hospital letterhead. Submitting that document to a court of law constitutes gross perjury and fraud upon the court." Both lawyers were actively packing their briefcases, now their movements frantic and uncoordinated. They realized in real time that their wealthy old money client had just roped them into a massive, highly illegal extortion conspiracy that could cost them their law licenses. Connor slammed his fist onto the mahogany table. "She is bluffing. You work for me. Sit down and make her sign the asset release." "I have one final exhibit," I said, raising my voice to command the absolute attention of the room. I pressed the remote one last time. The projector screen displayed the high-resolution surveillance photographs Desmond had captured just yesterday. The images showed Jada walking out of a luxury baby boutique in Buckhead, carrying heavy shopping bags. She was wearing a fitted pink maternity dress, and her stomach was perfectly undeniably round. "Your client posted a tearful video claiming she miscarried my niece on Sunday night," I said, staring dead into Connor's terrified eyes. "But here she is on Tuesday afternoon, walking around the affluent shopping district still wearing a medical-grade silicone prosthetic belly. She told the cashiers she is expecting twins." The lawyer on the right zipped his briefcase shut with a loud final snap. "We are formally withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately," he said to Connor, his voice shaking with furious indignation. Do not ever contact our firm again. If you attempt to file this lawsuit with another firm, we will be forced to report this interaction to the State Bar Ethics Committee. The two lawyers did not wait for Connor to respond. They marched to the boardroom doors, unlocked the deadbolt, and practically sprinted out of my consulting firm, leaving Connor completely alone in the dim glowing light of the projector screen. The deafening silence in the boardroom was broken only by the low hum of the projector fan. Connor sat frozen in the executive chair. The arrogant, untouchable white knight persona had entirely evaporated. He was completely outmatched financially, legally, and intellectually. He had no lawyers, no leverage, and no access to my parents' retirement accounts. He was a cornered predator facing total ruin. I walked over to the wall switch and turned the overhead lights back to full brightness. I suggest you leave my building before I call building security to escort you out, I said, keeping my distance but maintaining absolute unyielding eye contact. You are not getting a dime of my father's money. You are not getting a settlement. If you or your psychotic wife ever speak my name in public again, I will hand this entire digital dossier over to the district attorney and watch you both go to federal prison. Connor stood up slowly. His hands were trembling, but not from fear. His chest heaved with a dark, suffocating rage. He buttoned his tailored blazer, his eyes fixed on my pregnant stomach. Instead of walking toward the door, he took a slow, deliberate step toward me. He stopped just a few feet away, invading my personal space. The scent of stale scotch and expensive cologne rolled off him. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine, and his voice dropped to a chilling, breathy whisper. You think you are so smart, Kendra. You think you just won because you brought a slideshow to a fight. But you do not understand how this works. Jada always gets what she wants. She has her entire life. Brenda will make sure of it. And Jada wants those babies. She is going to be a mother to twins one way or another. He held my gaze for one horrifying second longer, ensuring the weight of his threat settled deep into my bones. Then he turned on his heel and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the door wide open behind him. I stood frozen in the center of the room, my hand resting protectively over my stomach as a profound icy dread washed over me. The extortion plot was dead, but the threat had just evolved into something far more dangerous. 3 months crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every unexpected noise in our house made my heart race. I spent the final trimester of my pregnancy treating my life like a high-security corporate merger, analyzing every vulnerability and sealing every breach. When my water finally broke, I did not experience the joyful, carefree rush most expecting mothers feel. I felt a cold, militant hypervigilance. I delivered Trey and Maya in a private, highly secured maternity suite at a hospital 2 towns over. I registered under a corporate alias to keep my name off the public patient directory. Jamal stood like a sentinel by the door the entire time. When the nurses finally placed my beautiful, healthy twins on my chest, tears of profound relief streamed down my face. Trey had his father's strong jawline and Maya had my eyes. They were perfect. But the absolute joy of holding my children was immediately undercut by the chilling, suffocating echo of Connor's voice in that boardroom. He had promised that Jada would be a mother to twins one way or another. I refused to allow a single photograph to be taken by anyone other than Jamal. I strictly forbade any birth announcements. My mother Brenda inevitably found out through her network of church gossips and sent a demanding text message ordering me to grant her and Jada immediate hospital access so they could bond with the babies. I blocked her number entirely and paid the hospital security director double his hourly rate to place a private guard directly outside my recovery room door. Nobody was getting near my bloodline. When Jamal and I finally brought the babies home, we did not return to a standard suburban house. We returned to a fortress. Jamal had utilized his elite architectural expertise to completely redesign our home security infrastructure. He had swapped his commercial blueprints for military-grade defense schematics. The front door was reinforced with a steel core. Every window on the ground floor was retrofitted with shatterproof ballistic-rated glass. I installed biometric fingerprint scanners on the doors leading to the nursery and our master bedroom. They have to get through me first, Jamal said, his voice a low, unwavering vow as he carried the car seats over the threshold. And I promise you, Kendra, I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone take them from us. We locked ourselves inside, cocooned in a protective bubble of sleepless nights, warm bottles, and the overwhelming love we felt for our children. But a predator does not stop hunting just because you lock the door. They simply wait for you to look away. The psychological warfare began 2 weeks after we brought Trey and Maya home. It started with small, deeply unsettling violations of our peace. I walked out to the front porch one morning to retrieve a package I assumed was a client file. Instead, I found a pristine, unmarked cardboard box, resting perfectly centered on our welcome mat. I opened it cautiously. Inside were 6 cans of imported premium European baby formula. There was no return address. There was no shipping label. Someone had walked up to our porch in the dead of night and hand-delivered it. Tucked between the expensive cans of formula was a heavy cardstock note. It read simply, "Only the best for our little ones." My stomach plummeted. Jada's psychotic delusion was no longer just an internet stunt to extort money. It was manifesting physically at my front door. She was sending expensive supplies because in her deeply fractured mind, she was providing for her babies. She was establishing a twisted narrative of motherhood. I immediately threw the entire box into the outside trash bin and scrubbed my hands with scalding water, feeling completely violated. Then came the white van. Jamal spotted it first while monitoring the neighborhood perimeter cameras from his home office. A plain, unmarked commercial white van, with heavily tinted windows, was idling casually just outside the wrought iron gates of our community. It did not attempt to enter. It just sat there, its engine running, positioned perfectly to watch every vehicle coming in and going out. I immediately called the Neighborhood Homeowners Association Security Patrol. The guards approached the vehicle, but reported back that the driver claimed to be an independent plumbing contractor waiting for a client to authorize entry. The driver had his windows rolled up tight and refused to provide a name. Because he was parked on a public city street just inches outside our private gates, the neighborhood security claimed their hands were tied. They could not force him to move. We knew exactly who was paying that driver. Connor was using the last scraps of his rapidly depleting cash to fund a surveillance operation. They were studying our habits. They were logging when Jamal left for his architectural firm and when the nanny arrived. They were mapping out the vulnerabilities in our routine. The constant anxiety began to take a physical toll on me. I stopped sleeping. Every time Trey cried in the middle of the night, I would jolt awake, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs, convinced someone was standing in the dark corner of the nursery. I started double-checking the biometric locks 3 times before I could even close my eyes. Jada and Connor were succeeding in their psychological torture. They were turning my sanctuary into a prison of paranoia. The tension finally snapped into pure, unadulterated terror on a rainy Tuesday night. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The house was dead silent save for the rhythmic patter of rain hitting the reinforced glass windows. I was sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery feeding Maya, while Trey slept soundly in his crib nearby. The soft amber glow of the nightlight cast long shadows across the room. I was just starting to close my eyes, lulled into a false sense of security by the quiet warmth of my daughter in my arms. Suddenly, the silent perimeter alarm triggered. It did not make a sound in the nursery to avoid waking the babies, but a pulsing bright red strobe light flashed aggressively on the security panel mounted to the wall. My blood ran completely cold. The perimeter sensors were calibrated to ignore animals and weather. They only triggered for a human presence breaching the property line. Before I could even stand up, the main house alarm erupted. The blaring, deafening siren tore through the silence of the night. Jamal was out of our bed and sprinting down the hallway in a fraction of a second. He burst into the nursery, his eyes wide and fully alert. I was holding his registered Glock in his right hand, his grip tight and deadly. "Lock the door right now," Jamal commanded, his voice carrying an absolute terrifying authority. "Do not come out until I come back for you." I grabbed Trey from his crib, clutching both of my crying babies tightly to my chest. I kicked the heavy oak door shut with my foot and slammed my hand against the biometric scanner. The steel deadbolt engaged with a heavy metallic thud, sealing us inside the fortified room. I backed into the furthest corner, sinking to the floor and shielding my children with my own body, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. Outside the nursery, I heard Jamal's heavy footsteps rushing down the main staircase. He bypassed the front door entirely and headed straight for the back patio, instinctively knowing the intruder would avoid the well-lit street view. Jamal kicked open the back door and stepped out into the pouring rain, raising his firearm. Through the storm, he spotted a shadowed figure crouched low against the side of the house. The intruder was actively tampering with the external power box, attempting to sever the main electrical line and disable the camera feeds. "Hey," Jamal roared, leveling his weapon. The figure dropped a pair of heavy bolt cutters and bolted toward the thick tree line that separated our backyard from the main road. Jamal did not hesitate. He sprinted off the patio and chased the intruder straight into the dark, rain-slicked woods. The man was fast, desperate, and clearly familiar with the layout of the property. He tore through the heavy brush, scrambling over a low stone retaining wall. Jamal cleared the wall. Seconds later, his boots slipping on the wet grass. But the intruder had already reached the public access road. Through the driving rain, Jamal saw the side door of the unmarked white van slide open. The shadowed figure dove inside, pulling the door shut behind him. Tires screeched violently against the wet asphalt as the driver slammed on the gas. The van fishtailed its red taillights, bleeding into the darkness before speeding off into the night. Jamal stood in the rain, his chest heaving, his weapon lowered, but still gripped tightly in his hand. He stared at the empty road, the cold reality of the situation washing over him. Connor and Jada were not just watching us anymore. They had officially crossed the line into a physical breach. They were coming for our children, and they were willing to cut the power to do it. The psychological warfare was over. The physical hunt had officially begun. Jamal stepped back through the patio door, rainwater pouring off his shoulders and pooling on the hardwood floor. He slammed the reinforced door shut, engaged the backup manual deadbolt, and immediately keyed a secure emergency code into his phone. Within 9 minutes, the flashing blue and red lights of 3 patrol cars illuminated the heavy rain pounding against our front windows. This was not the same dismissive response team we dealt with at the country club baby shower. A sharp knock echoed through the foyer, followed by a voice identifying himself as a detective. Jamal verified the badge through the secure monitor before pulling the door open. Detective Jackson stepped over the threshold with a heavy, commanding presence. He was a seasoned black investigator in his mid-40s, wearing a damp trench coat over a crisp suit. His sharp eyes immediately scanned the foyer, taking in the biometric locks and the shatterproof film Jamal had installed. He did not ask us if we were overreacting. He walked straight through the house to the back patio, shined a high-powered tactical flashlight into the pouring rain, and located the heavy steel bolt cutters the intruder had abandoned in the mud right next to our severed power box. "This was a targeted professional breach," Detective Jackson stated, turning back to face us in the kitchen. "The local patrol units are securing the perimeter and canvassing the main road, but a guy driving a ghost van in this weather is already gone. I need to know exactly who wants to get inside this house badly enough to cut a live electrical line." I did not waste a single second. I walked into my home office, unlocked my secure filing cabinet, and pulled out the thick black leather portfolio containing Desmond Tyrell's entire investigative dossier. I brought it back to the kitchen island and laid it open under the bright pendant lights. Detective Jackson took out a notepad, but as he started flipping through the pages, his pen went completely still. I watched his expression shift from standard professional curiosity to absolute cold disbelief. I showed him the initial police report from the country club where my sister Jada pressed a sterling silver cake knife against my pregnant stomach. I showed him the fraudulent business loan application originating from my brother-in-law Connor's real estate office. I showed him the $500,000 extortion lawsuit based on a fabricated miscarriage. Finally, I laid the side-by-side ultrasound photographs on the granite counter, proving Jada had stolen the medical imaging of my twins to build a psychotic public narrative of her own fake pregnancy. Detective Jackson stared at the surveillance photos of Jada walking out of the luxury baby boutique wearing a silicone prosthetic belly. He looked up at me, then at Jamal, and finally toward the hallway leading to the nursery where my newborn twins were sleeping. The officers who responded to that baby shower should have stripped Connor of his entitlement right there on the golf course. Detective Jackson said, his voice dropping to a hard, furious register. They let a wealthy white man in a tailored suit talk them out of arresting a woman who just threatened an unborn child with a deadly weapon. I promise you, Mrs. Washington, that kind of privilege holds zero weight in my jurisdiction. We are treating this as an active conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Before I could even thank him for finally validating the sheer terror we had been living with, a junior officer stepped into the kitchen. He was holding a precinct-issued radio phone, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Detective," the officer said hesitantly. "We just got an emergency transfer from the main dispatch line. There is a woman named Brenda claiming to be the homeowner's mother. She says she needs to speak to the lead investigator on the scene immediately regarding a mental health crisis." Jamal practically growled, his hands balling into tight fists. Detective Jackson did not flinch. He took the phone from the officer, pressed the speaker button, and set the device down, right next to the horrific dossier on the kitchen island. "This is Detective Jackson," he announced smoothly. "You are on speakerphone with the homeowners present. State your emergency." My mother's voice flooded the kitchen, dripping with that exact same artificial cloying sweetness she used to charm the country club cops. "Detective, thank God I reached you. I am calling to apologize for my daughter Kendra. You need to pull your officers off her property immediately. There is no intruder. She is suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and she is completely hallucinating." I stared at the phone, my blood running like ice water. Brenda was actively trying to intercept a police investigation to protect her golden child's kidnapping plot. "She has always been deeply unstable," Brenda continued, piling lie upon lie with breathtaking ease. "Ever since she brought those babies home, she has been having paranoid delusions. She thinks people are watching her. She probably cut her own power lines just to get attention. My husband Terrence and I are upstanding members of the First Zion Baptist Church, and we are simply trying to get her the psychiatric help she desperately needs. Please do not indulge her violent fantasies by writing a report. She is a danger to herself and she is just trying to frame her sister out of pure spite." Detective Jackson leaned over the kitchen island, placing both hands flat on the granite counter. He did not raise his voice. He did not sound angry. He sounded like a steel trap snapping shut. "Ma'am, let me stop you right there before you talk your way into a felony charge," Detective Jackson said. The line went dead silent. Brenda was clearly expecting another gullible officer who would blindly respect her suburban matriarch routine. "I am standing in a house outfitted with military-grade security cameras," Detective Jackson continued relentlessly. "I am looking at physical evidence of a severed main power line and abandoned burglary tools left by an adult male fleeing the scene. More importantly, I am currently reviewing a massive forensic dossier detailing your other daughter's extensive medical fraud, wire fraud, and an active extortion plot orchestrated by your son-in-law." Brenda let out a sharp, panicked gasp. "Detective, you do not understand," she stammered, her polished facade totally crumbling. "Connor is a highly respected real estate developer. Jada is grieving a tragic loss. Kendra is just trying to destroy their reputation." "Listen to me very carefully," Detective Jackson interrupted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Filing a false police report is a crime. Attempting to obstruct an active criminal investigation by providing false medical information about a victim is a crime. If you call my precinct again to interfere with this case, I will personally drive a patrol car to your house, put you in handcuffs, and charge you with obstruction of justice. Do not contact this family again." Detective Jackson hit the end call button, cutting my mother off mid-sentence. He did not even look at the phone. He just turned back to the junior officer. "Get the neighborhood security gate footage right now," Detective Jackson ordered. "I do not care if the driver had the windows tinted or the headlights off. I want every single frame of that white van scrubbed by the tech department." 30 agonizing minutes passed as we waited in the kitchen. Jamal paced the floor, checking the biometric locks on the nursery door 3 times. I sat at the island, reviewing Desmond's files, my mind racing through every possible connection. Connor was completely broke. He did not have the cash to hire a professional hit squad or a sophisticated extraction team. He was doing this on a budget, which meant he was using resources he already had access to. The junior officer practically ran back into the kitchen, holding a digital tablet. Detective, the tech team managed to pull a reflection off a wet stop sign near the neighborhood exit. They got a partial read on the rear license plate of the white van. Jackson took the tablet and tapped the screen, running the partial plate through the state motor vehicle database. I watched his eyes scan the results. He frowned, shaking his head. "The van is not registered to an individual," Jackson said, turning the tablet around, so Jamal and I could see the screen. "It is a commercial fleet vehicle registered to a holding company called Apex Zenith Logistics. The registered address is a commercial storage facility located in an industrial park on the far outskirts of the city." I stared at the name of the holding company, Apex Zenith Logistics. My financial consultant training immediately kicked into overdrive. I grabbed my laptop from my home office and brought it into the kitchen. I quickly logged into the state corporate registry database and typed in the name of the holding company. When you run a financial audit on a failing real estate developer, you learn very quickly how they hide their dying assets. Connor used shell companies to shuffle debt around and keep his creditors confused. I hit the enter key and pulled up the original articles of incorporation for Apex Zenith Logistics. I bypassed the dummy names listed on the board of directors and went straight to the registered agent section. I turned my laptop around to face Detective Jackson. "It is Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, terrifying whisper. "Apex Zenith Logistics is a subsidiary shell company managed entirely by Connor's primary real estate firm. He owns that white van. He owns the industrial storage facility it is registered to. That is where he is hiding." Detective Jackson stared at the corporate registration documents, his jaw clenching tight. He immediately reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need a tactical unit prepped and ready to roll. We have a confirmed location on the primary suspect in an attempted kidnapping." Jackson looked at me and Jamal, his expression deadly serious. "I am getting a midnight search warrant for that commercial storage facility right now. I need you both to come with me. If they are staging an abduction, they might have specific items belonging to your children stored at that location. I need you there to identify any stolen property. Get your coats. We are taking the fight directly to them tonight." The rain beat relentlessly against the windshield of Detective Jackson's unmarked cruiser as we tore through the dark, slick streets of Atlanta. Jamal sat beside me in the cramped back seat, his fingers interlaced so tightly with mine that I could feel his pulse hammering against my skin. The glowing digital clock on the dashboard read 3:15 in the morning. My chest was tight and my breathing was shallow, but I refused to let the exhaustion overtake me. My babies were safe at home behind biometric locks and an armed private security detail Jamal had called in just before we left the house. Now we were hunting the monsters who tried to cut our power. Detective Jackson sat in the passenger seat coordinating the raid over his encrypted radio. A judge had granted the emergency midnight search warrant for the Apex Zenith Logistics storage facility based on the severed power lines at our home, the abandoned bolt cutters, and the digital paper trail tracing the shell company directly back to Connor. In the span of a few hours, Connor and Jada had gone from orchestrating a white-collar financial extortion plot to triggering a full tactical police response. We turned off the main highway and entered a desolate industrial park on the far outskirts of the city. The area was a graveyard of rusted shipping containers, cracked asphalt, and flickering amber streetlights. At the very end of a dead-end road sat a sprawling corrugated steel building surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The rusted sign above the automated gate read, "Apex Zenith Logistics." There were no lights on inside. It looked completely abandoned. Jackson instructed our driver to cut the headlights as we pulled up a block away. 3 unmarked tactical vans were already in position, blending perfectly into the shadows of the abandoned warehouses. Heavily armed officers stepped out, silently moving with a terrifying and synchronized precision. "You two stay exactly where you are," Detective Jackson ordered, turning around to look at Jamal and me. "The perimeter is secure, but we do not know if Connor or anyone else is currently inside that facility. My tactical team is going to breach the main gate and clear the corridors. If this facility is holding stolen medical records, forged documents, or anything related to the attempted abduction of your children, I need you both here to identify the property. But you do not step out of this vehicle until I give the absolute all clear. Do you understand me?" We both nodded. Jamal pulled me closer, wrapping his heavy jacket over my shoulders to keep me warm against the chill of the damp cruiser. Jackson stepped out into the rain and joined the tactical unit. We watched through the rain-streaked window as the officers used heavy hydraulic cutters to snap the thick chain securing the front gate. They moved into the facility in a tight formation, their tactical flashlights cutting through the pitch-black darkness of the loading bays. The silence in the vehicle was deafening. Every passing second felt like an eternity. I leaned my head against Jamal's shoulder, staring at the dark and looming silhouette of the storage building. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the fractured logic of my sister's mind. Why register a ghost van to an empty storage unit? Why stage a fake pregnancy with a silicone belly, extort me for $500,000, and then send someone to cut my power lines in the middle of the night? She is not just trying to steal our money, I whispered to Jamal, my voice trembling with a sudden and horrifying realization. The financial extortion was Connor's plan to save his real estate business. But Jada does not care about his business. She cares about replacing me. Jamal looked down at me, his brow furrowed in the dark. What do you mean replacing you? I swallowed hard, pushing past the tight knot in my throat. When I was 14, I saved up my allowance for 6 months to buy this beautiful leather-bound journal. I wrote everything in it. My goals, my fears, my plans for college, my sketches for the future. One day, it just disappeared from my bedroom. I cried for a week thinking I had lost it at school. Brenda told me I was irresponsible and careless and that I needed to stop making a fuss. I paused as the memory turned my blood to ice water. 2 months later, Brenda was hosting a massive church auxiliary meeting in our living room. Jada walked downstairs holding a leather-bound journal. She stood in front of all those wealthy, judgmental women and began reading aloud. She read my goals. She read my intimate thoughts. She read my exact plans for the future. But when I tried to snatch it back and expose her, Brenda slapped me across the face in front of everyone. Jamal's grip on my hand tightened painfully. She let Jada steal your diary. It was not my diary anymore, I said, a cold dread washing over me. Later that night, I sneaked into Jada's room and found the journal. She had not just stolen it. She had painstakingly erased my name on the cover. She spent weeks rewriting every single page of my diary in her own handwriting. She memorized my thoughts and presented them to the world as her own brilliant mind. Brenda praised her for being so profound. Jada did not just want my things. She wanted the credit for my soul. Jamal stared at the dark storage facility, the realization hitting him just as hard. If she stole your thoughts and rewrote them to make herself the golden child, he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. What is she planning to do with your babies? The radio on the police cruiser dashboard crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. It was Detective Jackson. The tactical unit had finished clearing the building. There were no suspects inside. The facility was completely empty of human life, but they had found something else. Bring the homeowners inside, Jackson's voice commanded over the radio. I need them at Unit 408 immediately. A uniformed officer opened our car doors and escorted us through the pouring rain. We walked through the severed chain-link gate and entered the cavernous, echoing belly of the commercial storage facility. The air inside smelled of dust, industrial cleaner, and damp concrete. Rows upon rows of brightly painted orange roll-up doors stretched down the long, dimly lit corridors. We followed the officer down 3 winding hallways until we saw a cluster of tactical police gathered around a specific unit near the back corner. Detective Jackson was standing in front of a heavy corrugated metal door marked with the numbers 408 in faded black paint. Unlike the standard cheap padlocks on the other units, this door was secured with 2 heavy-duty commercial-grade titanium locks. Jackson looked at us as we approached. His expression was completely unreadable, a blank, hardened mask of professional discipline. But I could see a tight and disturbed tension in the corners of his eyes. We bypassed the security system on the main grid. Jackson explained, his voice low and tight. The owner of this specific unit has been drawing a massive amount of illegal electricity from the building's main power source. Whatever is inside here has been running on a heavy climate control system 24 hours a day. He gestured to a tactical officer holding a massive pair of hydraulic bolt cutters. Do it, Jackson ordered. The officer stepped forward. The heavy steel jaws of the cutters clamped down on the first titanium lock. With a loud and violent snap, the metal sheared in half and hit the concrete floor. The officer moved to the second lock, repeating the process. Another sharp crack echoed through the silent, dusty corridor. Jackson grabbed the handle of the corrugated metal door. He braced his boots against the concrete and shoved the heavy door upward. The metal tracks screamed and rattled as the door rolled into the ceiling, exposing the pitch-black void inside. A wave of cool, heavily air-conditioned air washed over us, smelling faintly of fresh paint and sterile cleaning supplies. Detective Jackson unclipped his heavy-duty tactical flashlight from his belt. He stepped forward and shined the piercing white beam directly into the center of the dark storage unit. The beam of light swept across the floor, illuminated the far wall, and stopped dead. Detective Jackson completely froze. His broad shoulders went perfectly rigid. He did not lower his weapon, and he did not step any further inside. He just stood there staring into the beam of his own flashlight, perfectly motionless. The silence in the corridor was absolute and suffocating. Jackson slowly lowered the flashlight just a fraction. He turned his head slightly, not taking his eyes off whatever horror he had just uncovered in the dark. "Mrs. Kendra, you need to see this." I stepped past the heavy corrugated metal door, my boots sinking into a plush cream-colored carpet that had absolutely no business being inside a filthy industrial facility. Detective Jackson moved his flashlight across the walls, searching for a light switch, and the breath violently left my lungs. This was not a storage unit. It was a perfectly executed, climate-controlled, soundproofed replica of my own home. Jackson found the switch. Soft, warm ambient lighting flooded the space, revealing two high-end mahogany cribs positioned perfectly in the center of the room. I walked forward, my hands shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists at my sides. The walls were meticulously covered in a custom sage green and gold leaf wallpaper. It was the exact same imported wallpaper Jamal and I had painstakingly chosen for our nursery 3 months ago. Above the cribs, painted in elaborate flowing gold calligraphy, were the names Trey and Maya. Jamal let out a sound that was half gasp and half growl. He stepped past me, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of horror and lethal rage as he took in the precise dimensions of the room. Jada had not just bought the same cribs, she had replicated the exact distance between the changing table and the rocking chair. She had copied the specific brand of organic cotton swaddles folded neatly on the shelves. She had recreated my sanctuary in a windowless concrete box. I stared at the pristine white nursing chair in the corner, and a wave of nausea washed over me. When we were 17, I spent 6 months hand-sewing a custom gown for the junior prom. I hid it in the back of my closet because I knew Jada would try to ruin it. 2 days before the dance, I came home to find Jada standing in the living room, wearing an exact professionally tailored replica of my dress. Brenda had found my sketches, taken them to a high-end boutique, and paid a seamstress double to rush order the gown for Jada. Brenda told me I was selfish for wanting to keep a pretty design all to myself, and she forced me to buy a cheap, ill-fitting dress off the clearance rack so Jada could be the center of attention. Jada did not just steal my ideas. She stole the reality I built and pasted her face over it. But a prom dress is one thing. Building a soundproof holding cell for my newborn children was an entirely different level of psychopathy. Detective Jackson did not say a word about the decor. His trained eyes were already sweeping the perimeter of the room, looking for the logistical infrastructure of a crime. He walked past the cribs toward the back wall and stopped in front of a massive corkboard illuminated by a small desk lamp. I followed him, Jamal close behind me. The corkboard was a chaotic, terrifying monument to my sister's obsession. Pinned to the center of the board were dozens of high-resolution photographs of my house. There were pictures of my driveway, my front porch, and the gated entrance to my neighborhood. Tacked next to the photos were incredibly detailed handwritten logs of my daily schedule. Jada had documented the exact times Jamal left for his architectural firm, the specific days our nanny arrived, and the precise windows of time I took the babies for walks around the cul-de-sac. Jamal reached out and ripped a large sheet of paper off the board, his hands shaking with fury. It was a printed copy of the architectural blueprints for our house. The security blind spots were circled in thick red marker. The electrical box the intruder had tried to sever tonight was marked with a massive X. But it was the documents pinned to the bottom corner of the board that made the blood freeze in my veins. I reached out and pulled two crisp, officially stamped papers from the cork. They were state-issued birth certificates. I read the names printed at the top: Trey Alexander Sterling and Maya Rose Sterling. The dates of birth matched my twins perfectly. But when I read the section for parental information, a cold, suffocating dread swallowed me whole. The mother was listed as Jada Sterling. The father was listed as Connor Sterling. They forged birth certificates. I whispered, my voice sounding hollow and distant to my own ears. They are establishing a completely fraudulent paper trail to prove legal custody. Detective Jackson immediately pulled a pair of latex gloves from his coat pocket and snapped them onto his hands. He began systematically opening the drawers of the small desk sitting beneath the corkboard. "This is a staging ground," Jackson said, his voice a low, hard rumble of absolute authority. They were not planning to keep the babies in the storage unit forever. The soundproofing and the climate control were just to keep them quiet and safe while they waited for the heat to die down. Jackson pulled a heavy fireproof lockbox from the bottom drawer. He set it on the desk and used a small tactical pry bar from his belt to force the latch open. The metal popped with a sharp crack. Inside the box were thick banded stacks of $100 bills. Next to the cash lay 4 prepaid burner phones and a sleek black leather travel wallet. Jackson opened the wallet and pulled out 2 crisp blue international passports. They bore the names Jada and Connor Sterling. Tucked neatly behind the passports was a printed receipt from an elite private aviation company. Jackson unfolded the paper and held it up to the desk lamp. "It is a flight manifest for a private charter plane," Jackson stated, his eyes scanning the departure details. "They booked a direct flight to a country with no extradition treaty to the United States." "When is the flight?" Jamal demanded, his voice dangerously close to a breaking point. Jackson looked up, his expression grim and unrelenting. "The departure date is exactly 48 hours from now." They booked the flight for 2 adults and 2 infants. The timeline clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Connor and Jada were completely out of money, their properties were in foreclosure, and I had permanently locked them out of my parents' retirement accounts. They had one final desperate play left: to secure the multi-million-dollar trust fund from Connor's grandfather. They needed physical possession of my children to trigger the payout, and they needed to disappear before the fraud was uncovered. "They sent that intruder to cut our power lines tonight," I said, staring at the flight manifest. "They were planning to abduct Trey and Maya under the cover of the storm, bring them to this soundproof nursery to acclimate them for 2 days, and then fly out of the country before the police could even issue an Amber Alert. They would have vanished with our children." Jamal said, the sheer terror of the thought making his broad shoulders tense. "They would have raised our babies on the other side of the world using stolen money." Jackson pulled out his radio, stepping away from the desk to coordinate with the tactical teams outside. "We are securing this entire unit as a major crime scene. We have the forged documents, the flight risk evidence, and the intent to commit kidnapping. I am going to have a warrant for Connor and Jada's immediate arrest drawn up before the sun rises. We are going to kick their front door off the hinges." As Jackson spoke into his radio, my personal cell phone buzzed violently in my coat pocket. The sudden vibration startled me. I pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. The caller identification displayed my mother's name, Brenda. It was 3:45 in the morning. Brenda never called this late unless she was demanding money or staging a dramatic medical emergency. I did not answer. I watched the screen glow in the dim light of the fake nursery until the call went to voicemail. A few seconds later, a text message popped up on the screen. I opened the message and read the words twice, ensuring my sleep-deprived brain was processing the information correctly. "Kendra, you have caused enough damage to this family with your petty jealousy and your paranoid delusions. Your sister is devastated by the loss of her child. I demand you come to the house tomorrow at noon for a healing family brunch. Bring the twins. It is time to mend fences and show Jada some grace. If you do not show up with those babies, I am cutting you off forever." I stared at the glowing screen. A healing family brunch. Bring the twins. Brenda was not organizing a brunch. She was organizing an ambush. Jada and Connor's midnight raid on my house had failed because Jamal chased their hired thug into the woods. They did not have the resources to attempt another forceful break-in, and their charter flight was leaving in less than 48 hours. They were out of time and out of options. So they turned to the one person who had always delivered their victims right to their doorstep. I looked up from my phone and locked eyes with Detective Jackson. "Do not kick their door down," I said quietly, the cold analytical strategist in me taking full control. "If you raid their house now, Connor will hire a defense attorney and claim he knows nothing about this storage unit. Jada will play the victim and say she built this nursery as a coping mechanism for her fake miscarriage. They will tie you up in legal red tape while they quietly slip out of the country." Jackson lowered his radio, his sharp eyes narrowing as he assessed my expression. "What are you suggesting, Mrs. Washington?" I turned my phone around and showed him the text message from my mother. "The brunch is a trap," I explained. "They failed to break into my house tonight, so Brenda is trying to lure me into bringing the twins directly to them tomorrow. They want me to walk my babies right into their living room." Jamal shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. You are not stepping foot in that house. I am not bringing the babies," I said, looking at my husband with absolute certainty. "But I am going to that brunch. We are not going to arrest them in the shadows where they can spin a narrative of victimhood. We are going to let them spring their trap right in the middle of Brenda's perfect, pristine dining room. And when they reach for my children, we are going to burn their entire world to the ground." The text message from Brenda glowed on my screen, demanding, "I bring my newborn twins to a healing family brunch, or risk being cut off forever." I looked away from my phone and locked eyes with Detective Jackson standing in the middle of that terrifying replica nursery. My mother was not organizing a peaceful Sunday reconciliation. She was organizing an ambush. Jada and Connor had failed to breach my home last night because Jamal chased their hired thug into the woods. They did not have the cash to attempt another forceful break-in, and their private charter flight to a non-extradition country was leaving in less than 48 hours. They were completely out of time and out of options. So they turned to the one person who had always delivered their victims right to their doorstep. "Do not kick their door down," I said quietly, the cold and analytical strategist in me taking full control. "If you raid their house now, Connor will immediately hire a defense attorney and claim he knows absolutely nothing about this storage unit. Jada will play the weeping victim and say she built this fake nursery as a coping mechanism for her traumatic miscarriage. They will tie you up in legal red tape while they quietly slip out of the country." Jackson lowered his radio, his sharp eyes narrowing as he assessed my expression. "What are you suggesting?" I turned my phone around and showed him the text message from my mother. "The brunch is a trap," I explained. "They failed to break into my house tonight, so Brenda is trying to lure me into bringing my children directly to them tomorrow morning. They want me to walk my babies right into their living room so they can take them." Jamal shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. You are not stepping foot in that house. I am not bringing the babies," I said, looking at my husband with absolute certainty. "But I am going to that brunch. We are not going to arrest them in the shadows where they can spin a narrative of victimhood. We are going to let them spring their trap right in the middle of Brenda's perfect, pristine dining room. And when they reach for my children, we are going to burn their entire world to the ground." The next morning, the Atlanta sun was shining brightly, completely erasing the evidence of the violent rainstorm from the night before. I pulled my luxury SUV into the sprawling circular driveway of my parents' estate in Buckhead. I did not park close to the house. I left my vehicle angled near the wrought iron gates, ensuring the path was completely clear for the tactical units I knew were currently staging out of sight just 2 blocks down the street. I opened the rear doors of my SUV and unbuckled the 2 heavy infant car seats. I had placed 20-pound dumbbells wrapped in thick towels inside each seat, covering them entirely with the premium organic cotton blankets Jada had tried to copy in her storage unit. The seats possessed the exact weight and visual bulk of carrying 2 sleeping newborns. I hoisted one heavy carrier onto each arm, feeling the familiar burn in my shoulders, and walked up the pristine brick pathway toward the heavy mahogany front door. I did not bother to knock. I used my spare key and pushed the door wide open. The house smelled overwhelmingly of Brenda's signature Sunday brunch. The rich aroma of buttered grits, fried catfish, and warm buttermilk biscuits drifted down the hallway. It was the exact same sensory manipulation she had used my entire life to force me into compliance. Whenever she wanted me to apologize to Jada for outperforming her in school, Brenda would cook a massive feast, invite the extended family, and ambush me with a public demand for submission. Today was meant to be her masterpiece. I walked straight into the formal dining room. The heavy crystal chandelier cast a bright, sparkling light over the table set with her best bone china. Jada was sitting at the head of the table. She was wearing a flowing, expensive silk maternity dress, pushing her stomach out to emphasize the silicone prosthetic she was still wearing underneath. Her face lit up with a psychotic, triumphant smile. The exact second I walked into the room carrying the two covered car seats. She looked like a predator watching its prey walk directly into a cage. Connor stood right behind her, his hands resting possessively on her shoulders. He wore a crisp linen shirt and a smug, arrogant expression, looking completely victorious. He truly believed his extortion and intimidation tactics had finally broken me. Brenda stepped out of the kitchen holding a silver pitcher of mimosas. She stopped, her eyes locking on to the covered car seats dangling from my arms. A deeply satisfied, condescending smile spread across her face. "I am so glad you finally came to your senses," Brenda cooed, setting the pitcher down on the pristine white tablecloth. "I knew you would realize how ridiculous you have been acting. This family is built on forgiveness and grace. We are perfectly willing to look past your paranoid delusions and the horrible stress you have put your sister through. Bring those sweet babies over here right now so Jada can hold her niece and nephew." I walked forward slowly, my boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I did not say a word. I reached the center of the long dining table and set both heavy car seats down directly onto the polished wood. Jada practically vibrated with excitement. She pushed her chair back and stood up, her eyes wide and manic as she stared at the thick cotton blankets concealing the contents of the carriers. "I am willing to forgive you, Kendra," Jada whispered, her voice trembling with an unhinged, greedy anticipation. "I know you did not mean to cause my miscarriage. I know you were just jealous. But we can share these babies. We can be a real family now." She reached her manicured hands forward, practically drooling as her fingers curled around the edges of the blankets. Connor stepped up right beside her, leaning over the table to get his first look at the children they planned to abduct and fly out of the country in less than 24 hours. Jada ripped both blankets back at the exact same time. She stared down into the car seats. Her triumphant smile completely vanished. The air violently left the dining room. There were no babies. There were only steel dumbbells wrapped in white bath towels. Jada's face contorted into a mask of pure primal rage. Her eyes widened until the whites showed all the way around, and the veins in her neck bulged against her skin. She slammed her hands down onto the dining table, rattling the expensive crystal glasses. "Where are my babies?" Jada shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat like a feral animal. "Where are they? This is my day. You brought them for me. They belong to me." Before Jada could lunge across the table, the heavy mahogany front door of the house exploded open with a deafening crash. Police Detective Jackson roared, his voice booming like thunder down the hallway. "Nobody move. Keep your hands where I can see them." 10 heavily armed tactical officers swarmed into the formal dining room in a matter of seconds. They flooded the space, their heavy boots trampling over Brenda's pristine Persian rugs. The flashing red and blue lights from the cruisers outside illuminated the large bay windows, painting the neighborhood with the undeniable public reality of a major criminal raid. Brenda dropped her linen napkin, her hands flying to her mouth as she let out a piercing scream. Terrence stumbled backward into the china cabinet, completely paralyzed by shock as officers secured the perimeter of the room. "What is the meaning of this?" Connor shouted instinctively, stepping in front of Jada and puffing his chest out. He immediately defaulted to his white privilege, attempting to use his sheer arrogance to bully law enforcement. "Do you have any idea whose house you just broke into? I demand your badge numbers right now. I will have your entire precinct shut down by tomorrow morning. You do not just storm into a private residence in Buckhead without a warrant. I have a warrant for a commercial storage facility operating under Apex Zenith Logistics," Detective Jackson stated coldly, stepping right up to Connor and invading his personal space. "We executed that warrant at 4 o'clock this morning." Connor's face lost absolutely all of its color. The smug, untouchable facade instantly shattered. He backed up, his knees hitting the edge of a dining chair. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of glossy 8 by 10 photographs. I slammed the pictures down onto the center of the dining table right next to the empty car seats. The first photograph displayed the horrifying exact replica of my twins' nursery, hidden inside the dark concrete walls of the storage unit. The second photograph showed the massive corkboard pinned with my daily schedules, Jamal's architectural blueprints, and the marked security blind spots surrounding my home. Brenda stared at the photographs scattered across her dining table. Her entire body began to tremble violently. "What is this?" she gasped, her eyes darting between me and Jada. "What are these pictures?" "This is where your golden child was planning to keep my babies after she kidnapped them," I said, my voice echoing with ruthless clarity. I threw the final documents onto the table. I made sure they landed right in front of my father. These are forged state birth certificates listing Connor and Jada as the biological parents of Trey and Maya. And underneath them is the flight manifest for a private charter plane departing for a non-extradition country tomorrow night. Terrence picked up the forged birth certificates. His hands shook so violently the paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. He looked up at Jada, his eyes wide with profound, devastating horror. "You were going to steal her children," Terrence whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "You faked a miscarriage, and you were going to steal your own sister's babies." "I was just taking what rightfully belongs to me," Jada screamed, completely losing her grip on reality. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face twisted in absolute psychosis. "She stole my life. She stole my wealth. She stole the twins I was supposed to have. I am the eldest. I am the one who deserves the trust fund payout." Connor raised his hands defensively, backing away from his wife and turning to Detective Jackson. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this," Connor stammered, throwing Jada under the bus without a single second of hesitation. "She is insane. I just thought she was buying baby clothes. I did not know about any abduction plot. I want my lawyer." "Save it for the federal prosecutor," Detective Jackson snapped. He grabbed Connor by the shoulder, spun him around roughly, and slammed his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the dining room. "Connor Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, wire fraud, and extortion." An officer grabbed Jada's arms and pulled them behind her back. Jada thrashed violently, her designer maternity dress tearing at the shoulder as she kicked at the dining room chairs. She screamed hysterically, her voice raw and breaking. "They are mine. This is my day. You cannot do this to me. I am the mother." Brenda collapsed onto the floor, her lavender church suit crumpling against the hardwood. She wailed loudly, burying her face in her hands, as the absolute reality of her golden child's insanity completely shattered her perfect, curated world. The neighbors were undoubtedly standing on their lawns, watching the police drag the supposedly flawless Jada Sterling out the front door in handcuffs, while she wore a fake silicone belly. Brenda's reputation in the community was permanently, irrevocably annihilated. Terrence stepped forward, his eyes pleading and desperate. He reached his trembling hand out toward me. "Kendra, please," he begged, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You have the power of attorney. You control the bank accounts. We need money to post their bail. We need to hire defense lawyers. Please, you have to release the funds. She is your sister." I looked at the man who had spent 32 years watching his wife emotionally destroy me, and who was now asking me to fund the legal defense of the monsters who tried to abduct my newborn babies. I looked at him with absolute freezing indifference. "You chose your daughter," I said, my voice empty of any remaining sympathy. "I chose mine." I turned my back on my parents and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back at the chaos, the crying, or the flashing police lights illuminating the neighborhood. I walked down the brick pathway, got into my luxury SUV, and drove away for the absolute last time. I drove back through the heavy iron gates of my secure, wealthy community. I walked through my reinforced front door and locked the biometric deadbolt behind me. The house was quiet, warm, and perfectly safe. I walked into the living room where Jamal was sitting on the plush sofa, holding Trey and Maya securely against his broad chest. He looked up at me, his dark eyes filled with absolute relief and unwavering love. I sat down next to him, wrapping my arms around my family. I had survived the fire, protected my bloodline, and left the ashes of my toxic family permanently behind. The greatest lesson learned is that blood does not equate to family. Mutual respect does. For years, you might shrink yourself to appease toxic relatives who weaponize your loyalty. However, healing begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you. True empowerment comes from securing your financial independence, establishing ironclad boundaries, and realizing that your unapologetic success is your absolute best revenge. Sometimes, the ultimate act of self-love is walking away from a destructive bloodline without guilt. You survive their fire by building a beautiful, unbothered life surrounded by people who genuinely value you. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more.